consider us kind of brothers.
Yeah, we have Tom right here.
From specific side angle sign profiles, me and Tom actually look very similar. So that's a joke I always let slide. And I actually was going to consider Tom. Thanks for asking for my opinion, by the way. And there is Tom. What? That is from that angle specifically, from the top down.
If it weren't for the color of his hair,
if it wasn't
the color of his hair gives it away.
Yeah.
But
it's true. It's true. He's a brother from another mother. But for my prediction, I think I'm going to go also into Taiwan and pick Roger. I think he is a player that's very quietly been one of the best players in that region for a long time. And if you look at his history in tournaments, he's always done really well in a lot of these opens, but he's always come really short when it mattered the most in the most official tournaments there is. I think Roger is a player that people will talk about, and he's brought the Pavel lineup. He brought 2 Reno decks, 2 Pirate decks, and I think that's the lineup to beat. I think last week kind of showed that you can try to be a little innovative, bring all aggro, but it didn't really work out. And I think just being rock solid, just not relying on any gimmicks or any way to really corner the field, and just good solid play.
Well, it worked out for the winner of last week.
Yeah,
played 3 aggro decks and Reno Warlock, but yeah, the all aggro lineup did not perform as well.
Yeah. Certainly. So that's our picks. And let us know what you guys pick as well, and hope you guys stay engaged in the conversation. Let us know on social media by hashtagging HCT. In the meantime, we're still getting ready for the first match here, Ping Ping Ho versus Shoshi Ho. Taking a look at these guys' deck lists a little bit. We didn't actually talk too much about how they actually outfit everything here. Do you think Ping Ping Ho can do it? He's got kind of like all over the map here, Brian. He's got that Tempo Mage. He's got Jade Shaman, and those seem to be going in conflicting directions.
Well, they do somewhat. It sort of depends on what his ban strategy is. You know, this is a pretty usual lineup. We haven't seen this specific lineup from any player yet. Ping Ping Ho does pride himself on being a creative player. He even said, I think back at the World Championships in 2015, back when Aggro Shaman was actually pretty popular, he's like, I don't want to play that. I want to play my Shaman deck. I want to play mid-range Shaman. Yeah. And while Aggro Shaman is the most popular version here, he's playing a kind of unusual build of Jade Shaman. He even has a single copy of Feral Spirits, which generally is not played in the mid-range versions, usually used to, say, protect Tunnel Trog or just protect your face against weapons. Not really so useful in the sort of former in this deck, but definitely valuable against Arcanite Reapers headed at your face.
Yeah, Jade Shaman, definitely the less popular version. Pretty much almost a 3-to-1 ratio. For every 3 aggro Shaman decks, there's 1 Jade Shaman, just to show you the popularity of it. Shaman's not 100% represented in the field this week, which is
there one person this time again?
I think there is one special snowflake that did not bring Shaman.
Last week was Monsanto. So.
Yeah, actually, it's a very interesting lineup, but we'll have to go ahead and talk about that more later. There's also a couple of weird decks in the field. One of them is by Rojum, who actually competed last year in HCT as well on the big stage. He's bringing a mid-range Paladin deck and a mid-range Warlock deck, and you can't even really say anything else besides it. It's just, I want to kill aggro, and if you guys haven't seen the deck list, I highly suggest you look them up because it is really interesting. And Brian, I tried playing some of these decks on ladder last night with Admirable, and I lost a lot. So I'm really worried for this guy if he's going to be able to do well today.
Well, I have played my share of weird Paladin decks on ladder and also lost a lot. So I can definitely feel the pain of trying to get that to work. But it'll be interesting to see if it does end up paying off.
It goes to 5 mana of just being able to remove stuff, and then it goes to Rag Light Lord, and that's it. It's just a bunch of anti-aggro tools, Rag Light Lord, and hopefully you just outlast any kind of aggressive deck. It's really interesting, and hopefully we can be able to catch up with him throughout the day. And of course, we're going to be doing 7 rounds of Swiss all across Asia Pacific. We have a bunch of locations across the region, and they're all fighting for 4 spots in the Bahamas, which is where we're hosting the Winter Championships at the end of March. Take a look at this video previewing the upcoming Winter Champs.
The Hearthstone Championship Tour is heading to the Caribbean for the Winter Championships. Bring your beach towel and best decks to the Bahamas. The Melia Nassau Beach Hotel will host the 16 worthy qualifiers from the playoffs. They'll be competing for a piece of the $2 million prize pool and a spot in the World Championships. It's Hearthstone in Paradise, the Winter Championships, March 23rd to 26th in the Bahamas.
Players already have booked their ticket from Europe. Pavel, the reigning world champion, who also won the winter event. Green Sheep, who came from 2014's BlizzCon run. Shane Udachi, a very good player hailing from Russia and not too far from Russia. Iria, the runner-up from 2015. Europe Championship. I'm looking at those 4 as the 4 to beat right now. Sure, you have really good guys like Omega Zero and Frozen in the mix there too, but Europe's 4 are just so solid.
I think that at least as far as players who are there from regions specifically so far, Europe definitely looks the best, the overall strongest lineup there. So we're going to see if Asia Pacific is going to have the lineup to compete with them after this weekend. So we're getting ready to start. There is a little bit of a technical difficulty at some of the locations here. This is the first time that Asia Pacific is running this style of event. As you mentioned before, many of the previous seasons, the different regions had different ways that they sent their own representatives to the championship. So this is the first time these locations are going through this process. So maybe a few bumps along the road as we're encountering right now.
Yeah, it's spanning all the way from the north to the south. You have, all the way up in the top of Asia, all the way to the bottom of Australia, New Zealand. And then there's a lot of stuff, moving parts going on. So thank you guys for being patient with us as we're getting for the first series of the day here. Taking a look at how they actually qualified last year for people who don't know is that some had just tournament qualifications. If you won, for example, the OGN tournament, you could probably be seeded into the championships versus some other people had an actual qualifier for it, similar to what we did last year as well. A lot of these regions also have a lot of rivalry. People are saying Korea is the best, but a lot of countries say that we think we can take them on. We just never had a real chance outside of the Asia-Pacific championships, and that was only 8 players. So it feels like this is an actual opportunity for Japan, for Singapore, Malaysia, all these other underrated regions to really step up here, Brian.
All right, well, it will be the chance for these players to prove themselves against one another. Pimping Ho from Taiwan against Seolseo from Korea. Getting into the first game, it is Pimping Ho playing Warlock against Seolseo playing Mage.
For clarification, Pimping Ho is not playing any kind of Leroy Jenkins Faceless Manipulator combo, and Seolseo is playing a more combo-heavy Reno Mage. He has Ice Lance in there and a lot more ability to draw and find burn damage, so that's going to be helpful for him if he wants to go for that game plan, assuming that his board control isn't enough. And that gives Reno Mage the slight edge, but we'll see how it ends up navigating, because this matchup can change a lot over the course of turns.
Absolutely. There are kind of a few phases to the way that this matchup tends to work out. The pressure phase from the Warlock is essentially them looking for their early big minions, their Twilight Drakes, their Mountain Giants. If they're able to establish one of those early and the Reno Mage does not have the tools to deal with it, it can be very, very difficult for them to come back, because the Reno Mage deck doesn't have that many ways to deal with big minions in general. We do see the Polymorph in Seolseo's hand. That's a very important card against that particular phase of the game. There's also, from the Reno Mage perspective, early pressure. You want to try to get the Warlock to be forced to use Reno Jackson fairly early on. Then you can potentially Alexstrasza them back down to 15 and finish them off with burn.
Yep, and that's much more of a recognition of what state of the game you're in, just like you said. Are you the one beating down the opponents, or are you the one defending yourself to make sure you don't just get blown out here? And don't be too afraid also. Sometimes you have to be the one taking the initiative, and sometimes the Reno Warlock has to play Draxus and not be afraid of dying to the burn.
Yep. Keeping track of exactly what your opponent has played is also crucial in the matchup, because if your opponent, for instance, doesn't have the combination of cards remaining in their deck to kill you from 15, Drax is a much safer play, whereas if your opponent has shuffled Roaring Torch into their deck and has not played Fireball or Frostbolt, then you might just die.
And one of the most important cards, perhaps, in this matchup, already coming to the hand of Pimping Ho, we see Ragnaros the Fire Lord. That's already a choice that we saw several players make last week that ended up being pretty good for them. We saw Doc Pone, for example, last week made a huge, unprecedented run that surprised everybody, including himself. Yeah. And he was playing a pretty greedy Reno Warlock, and perhaps Pimping Ho got inspired by that.
Yeah, Pimping Ho's list is kind of a hedge between that style of deck and the anti-aggro style. He's not playing the Leroy Jenkins combo, so doesn't have the ability to just finish the game out of nowhere, but he still has Mountain Giant. He still has Ragnaros. So he has these big threats that can hope to just outlast the removal from a deck like Reno Mage, and eventually one of them sticks and it will kill them.
Seolseo, by the way, his deck list, the one thing that does end up leaving a big question mark is he is playing burn elements. As you see Ice Lance, for example, which extends his range, but he doesn't have necessarily the draw to cycle into it. You look at some really well-known Reno Mage experts, such as Rage, and he says if you're gonna try to go for a burn-heavy style of Reno Mage trying to kill your opponent with a combo of spell damage, you have to make sure to support it with a lot of draw, and I don't see that in his deck. I don't see Loot Hoarder, I don't see Novice Engineer, I don't see Acolyte of Pain. Instead, it's a lot more value-oriented cards, such as Manic Soulcaster. So it feels like it's a hybrid. It's halfway in between for Soulshiho, and we'll see if it works out because his hand is a little bit victim to that right now. It's got a lot of burn and removal, but he needs to draw and have better plays than just a 6 Swampus.
Yeah, and that's particularly crucial in this matchup because this is a matchup that is essentially guaranteed to go long. So if you're just drawing cards like Ice Lance, cards like Fireball that don't really do anything to actually put long-term pressure on your opponent, it can be very difficult for you to really get a footing in the game. And your opponent's a Warlock. They have life tap. They can just get ahead in terms of raw resources if you don't have that card draw.
All right, so a little bit of a slow start to game number 1 here. Ping Ping Ho doesn't exactly have a turn 4 that he's ramping up for. He doesn't have the Twilight Drake or the Mountain Giant, which are in his deck. Instead, he can try to alleviate a little bit of pressure instead of life tapping, and that is pretty crucial early on. You don't want to give the Mage too much board because then you're stuck using heals defensively, and Mage can leverage your burn spells. So Ping Ping Ho weighing the option of, do I want to play or do I want to tap?
Yeah, I like the life tap here. This is largely a resource battle, and we see that Soulshiho does not have card draw in his hand, and now he's not going to be able to put on any more pressure. And that's true of most draws that the Reno Mage deck is going to have. They're not going to be able to put on a significant amount of pressure to back up this early Swamp Ooze. So Ping Ping Ho just taking the game slow. He knows I have Refreshment Vendor in my hand. That can just come down next turn and mitigate pretty much all the damage that this Ooze is going to do, and then challenge it on board itself. And we may even see Soulshiho just use the Doomsayer here. Being able to prevent your opponent from getting something down on turn 4 is a significant option in these matchups. I think he probably won't, considering he doesn't have another play himself. Usually want to use Doomsayer to give yourself a clear board to actually play into something, but just ensuring your opponent can't drop Twilight Drake or can't drop Mountain Giant is a absolutely legitimate strategy as well.
Certainly, and maybe Soulshiho feels like because he already has initiative on the board, if he's also removing, he can't really follow up this Doomsayer with anything reliable. So rather than try to kill off his own minion and seize tempo that he'll never even gain anyways, maybe just pushing a little bit extra damage here. Putting the Reno Warlock into the teens, he has damage from the hand. What if he picks up Bloodmage Thanos, for example, and all of a sudden, because Ping Ping Ho gets careless, he dies from, 16 health?
Yeah, there is the distinct possibility when you are playing the Ice Lance version to just blow your opponent up. That's something that Ping Ping Ho is going to need to be aware of. He, I think, is debating this turn whether he wants to life tap and play an Acidic Swamp Ooze or just play the Refreshment Vendor. The Vendor's the more defensive play. It helps to mitigate the damage coming in from the opposing Swamp Ooze, but has slightly less long-term value. But I think that he recognizes this 3-2 is just a real threat, and he doesn't want to let Soulshiho just get his health total down too low, because there is that threat of that burst burn damage.
All right, Manic Soulcaster, another card which, again, we were debating, are you putting cards in like Manic Soulcaster, or are you putting in extra draw mechanics specifically to help you accelerate your win condition in matchups like this? Now, granted, Soulshiho in other matchups where perhaps the Mirror, for example, he would be able to be utilizing this a lot more efficiently. Now he has to ask himself, am I going to play this for low tempo, or am I going to play the long-term game? Am I going to have to part ways with Fireball here in order to keep this Acidic Swamp Ooze on the board?
Fireball is also just one of your key cards in the matchup. Being able to burn your opponent down is essentially the way you win this game as the Reno Mage. That's your primary win condition is exploding your opponent at some point, and that's a very key part of it with that 6 points of burn. However, you also don't want to just give the board over to your opponent and prevent yourself from getting additional damage in from this Swamp Ooze. So it's definitely a tough decision for Soulshiho, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him just fire that off. Looks like it may be Doomsaying and just going face. This is trying to prevent something. I can't really think of a 5-drop that this necessarily prevents, and it doesn't really give him the board that actually gets to something. It does potentially block his opponent from life tapping next turn, but this can even just walk into the life tap plus Shadow Bolt to remove it as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of answers that Ping Ping Ho can have, and I'm thinking Soulshiho is just trying to adapt to what his hand is pointing him towards, which is burning your opponent out. if this Doomsayer activates, he can also weave in hero powers over 2 turns. He hero powered this turn, and he hero powers with the Manic Soulcaster next turn, and just playing it onto the board. And that might get him closer, and don't underestimate it. Every single point of damage will matter in this matchup.
It absolutely will. It's very important to get your opponent into a position where they have to use healing awkwardly, and you're able to maneuver your own burn against it. He's also threatening the possibility that he does have, say, coin into Emperor Tharson next turn. Sure. That's often what this will indicate to your opponent, is the fact that you plan on playing a big 6-drop like Emperor, that they will no longer have a board that can automatically contest. But Pimping Ho, he can just remove this if he wants with the attack of the Refreshment Vendor plus Shadow Bolt. And I expect that we might see that, considering he doesn't want to just give an empty board over to Celcio, even if it will kill the Acidic Swamp Ooze. Oh, he's actually going to go with the Hellfire. Okay. This clears the board, gives him value from the Mortal Coil as well, plus saves the Shadow Bolt for future removal. It does get his Refreshment Vendor down into range of the hero power, though that may have happened anyway thanks to the Ooze as well.
Right. I think Pimping Ho's logic is that if he's hero powering, he's not playing an Emperor Thorstand, and that gives me an opportunity to play my Emperor Thorstand.
It's true.
Which forces him to react, and then I'll have gained so much tempo to play Ragnaros the following turn.
So interesting options here from the Cabal Courier. Spellbender is the most powerful of these cards in the matchup in general, because you can protect an individual large minion from a removal effect. The problem being, of course, that Celcio does not have a minion to protect, so it's possible that the Spellbender just gets used up by something small if he were to play it early. He also just doesn't have the mana to deploy it right now. Shadowward Pain is good against opposing Doomsayer, but not all that much else.
Maybe Nimp Gang Boss.
Demon Wrath.
Demon Wrath is funny because it feels like you're helping them most of the time.
Weird selection.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of what the motivation is to take Demon Wrath over those other options, because your opponent isn't really playing many small minions, and many of the small minions they might play are demons. So maybe you are planning on using that to combine with hero power and your courier if your opponent does play Emperor, so it's kind of a pseudo removal spell.
Yeah, I think the lack of any kind of area effect cards in his hand made him nervous in case his opponent starts going a little bit wider. But Demon Wrath is definitely one of the weaker ones, especially against Reno Warlock.
Right. I'm definitely a little curious about that particular decision. And now, Celcio, he is facing a 4/10 Twilight Drake. And as I mentioned way back at the beginning, one of the important things in this matchup is exhausting those removal spells that can deal with big minions. If Celcio does use the Polymorph on this, he's going to potentially come up short when that Ragnaros comes down in a couple of turns.
Well, Celcio, maximum damage this turn is 15. So that's actually not a trivial amount of damage at all. And I wonder if Celcio is thinking about setting up some kind of 2-turn push.
Yeah, he actually can basically just demand Reno Jackson if he just pushes damage.
Huh.
And Pimping Ho is not necessarily aware of this. He doesn't recognize necessarily that this is the amount of burn that Celcio has in his hand.
Right.
And he is essentially in a position where he has to use some sort of healing, or he's going to get burned out. Because we see the Fireball, Frostbolt, and Ice Lance, and that represents a huge amount of damage coming next turn.
Certainly. And Pimping Ho doesn't have Reno Jackson. The only heal that I see in his hand directly is the Earthen Ring Farseer. But then your opponent still has this 2/2 Cabal Courier on the board, so it's not exactly the most guaranteed. I think Pimping Ho is thinking, well, my opponent's also had a series of very bad plays. Turn 4, he Doomsayered and Hero Power. On turn 5, he played Cabal Courier, and on turn 6, he's just polymorphing. He's playing very reactive. His hand has to be full of spells or something very reactive, such as burn damage.
Yeah, Pimping Ho taking quite a while on this turn, which kind of gets Kazakus out of the options of things he might be able to play. If he doesn't remove this 2/2 or heal, he is dead.
Oh no.
Oh,
wow.
Wow, and yeah, Pimping Ho absolutely not respecting the burn potential. We see just sort of a sigh of relief from Celcio, who recognizes, yes, here comes Fireball, here comes Frostbolt, here comes Ice Lance, and that 2 damage from the Cabal Courier. He's just rechecking his math here, it looks like, but
Exacties.
Yeah, it's actually exactly lethal. And Pimping Ho did not play around this. He had to have exactly these cards, as they say on Twitch. But Celcio, he has them, and there's all that damage to the face, and Celcio goes up 1-0.
I want to say that this is a pretty significant win because Ping Ping Ho does have decks like Jade Shaman's lineup. However, Shaman was banned on both sides. That is one of your better decks against Reno Mage, so perhaps not the end of the world here. Still, though, I have to imagine that Ping Ping Ho is not happy with the way that worked out. And looking like that Iceland's tech from Sosi Ho really paying off huge dividends here.
Yeah, it's a card that can be kind of surprising in spots like that. You don't necessarily think about the huge burst potential at that stage of the game. You often think about the Iceland's kind of at the end of the game, fueling Archmage Antonidas or late game burn, but the exact lethal there definitely took Ping Ping Ho off guard.
Yep, and now Sosi Ho has to win with his Pirate Warrior and his Reno Warlock himself. Looks like Ping Ping Ho, we got word that is going to be sticking onto the Reno Warlock. It's a little bit of a mistake there on the graphic. He's bringing Mage, not 2 Warlock decks.
You can't bring 2 Warlock decks.
He specifically made videos all of the past couple of years to say you can't bring 2 Warlock decks. And that is a Tempo Mage from Ping Ping Ho. Tempo Mage still pretty good against Reno Warlock. Pirate Warrior, of course, can still just get a win. And then Reno Warlock is just very versatile in general. So Ping Ping Ho is not out of this series, but that's a little bit of a rocky start. You feel like, and there's definitely something very tangible about momentum in the series, especially when Ping Ping Ho, he's the one that was setting the pace. He was roping a lot. He was taking his turns, really thinking about all the possibilities, and he just died out of nowhere. That's got to be a little bit upsetting.
And in his profile piece, too, Ping Ping Ho talked about how important your mindset is in an event. And losing a game like that to just a burst damage seemingly out of nowhere from your perspective has to do something to your mindset, certainly, in the first game of the day.
Right, and I don't want to say anything definitively, but I do feel like Ping Ping Ho was a large favorite to win that game based off the way the hands were shaping up. I mean, Sosi Ho did have Alex Straza, but it seemed like Ping Ping Ho had a lot of powerful plays. He could have played Emperor Thaurissan, could have played Ragnaros. He had some of these strong cards that the deck is oriented around.
It did feel like it was something of an unnecessary risk. He had so many more resources than Sosi Ho had that he could have used them more defensively. He could have perhaps played a removal spell, perhaps played heal that turn, and just been out of range of any possibility of burst combination, and just kept riding the life tap to victory.
Yeah, because remember that turn we were debating if they're going to play Emperor Thaurissan versus the Twilight Drake. If you play Emperor Thaurissan, that kind of warrants a Fireball or a Polymorph or something. Then you play the Twilight Drake. That demands an answer as well. And then all of a sudden your opponent doesn't have control of the board. That little Cabal Courier that could end up getting so much damage out. I think it got 4 to 6 damage, and that's not what it should be doing at all that late into the game.
All right, well, will be the mirror match, the Reno Warlocks. So these two decks, they are not quite mirrored. There, as we mentioned, is the Ragnaros in actually both copies of the deck. They actually are both playing Ragnaros. They're both playing Mountain Giant. And yeah, there is actually the combo in Sosi Ho's deck as opposed to Ping Ping Ho. So in this matchup, I believe, sort of structurally, Sosi Ho is a little bit favored because of the presence of combo. That means that he can safely play Jaraxxus, whereas Ping Ping Ho cannot. There's no threat of burst damage just finishing the game in quite that same way.
Yeah, assuming that Sosi Ho doesn't toss away some of the resources. In fact, Sosi Ho's range is extended even further because he has Soulfire in his deck. So he can actually reach up to 24, which might make him comfortable even ditching Power Overwhelming, because that means he can hit for Leroy Jenkins, Faceless Manipulator, and a Soulfire. So he still has range to hit a Jaraxxus, even if he has to part ways and use Power Overwhelming for, say, Shadow Flame.
And this is a much better opening hand for Ping Ping Ho, however. He has the Mountain Giant in his hand. That is one of the sort of game-defining big minions. Chooses to play his Voidwalker, though, which does kind of mess with Mountain Giant costing, as well as not really doing much in the early turns.
It's okay because you're going on the coin, because you're going to be life tapping 2 turns anyways. So this is actually one of the instances where playing it, if Sosi Ho had the coin, I think Ping Ping Ho would probably reevaluate.
It does prevent you from drawing a powerful 4 and then getting the life tap in and Mountain Giant on 3.
That is true.
So depending on what Ping Ping Ho picks up, this could end up kind of throwing his best plays off curve, but it does not disrupt his ability to just play Mountain Giant on turn 4.
One thing I do like is that Voidwalker is not a card that loses... Okay, it does lose some utility as the time goes on, but Voidwalker's trading poorly with pretty much every minion in your opponent's deck. So utilizing it as a spot taunt in a moment where you need to defend yourself, such as playing Jaraxxus, for example. If you play a Voidwalker in Jaraxxus, your opponent can only get in half the combo damage.
Yeah, this is a crucial card. We were talking about how the burst damage was a key element of Sosi Ho's deck that can give him an edge in this matchup. But just a lowly Voidwalker can keep that combo at bay in the late game, and it's just not really going to do very much now in the early game. Those one-point attacks, I mean, they do add up, I suppose, over time, but not to very much.
Well, let's see if Soshi reacts a little bit dramatically here. I don't expect anything more than just a life tap here from Soshi because his hand is pretty poor. But some players who might overreact and say, you know what, I have 3 mana, maybe I Shadow Bolt that. Then Pimping Ho, he's really happy. He's setting up an opportunity for his opponent to misplay, essentially. All right, well, Pimping Ho's got that Mountain Giant lineup for next turn, and Voidwalker gotten 2 damage, 1 mana, 2 damage. That's about average, so worst case scenario, you got basic value for that card. I wouldn't hate it. But this is the ever crucial turn that happens in this matchup. Turn 4, Brian. Soshio's got a few options here.
I would expect to see him go with the Refreshment Vendor just because, oh wow, he's actually just going to life tap into Doomsday. Okay, he wants to block the turn 4. So this is definitely understandable from Soshi. Wants to ensure that if Pimping Ho does not have, or rather does have, one of the big threats on this turn, doesn't get a chance to play them. This also, we look at the size of Pimping Ho's hand. He is going to be forced to burn a card here. He can't life tap. There's no great opportunity for him to actually play anything productively because of the Doomsayer here. So many. Well, also just gives the board over to Soshi.
Yeah, and you have to kind of evaluate what's the least important card, and it
just Earthen Ring himself.
It might be the coin.
He could just coin. He could just Corruption, just throw that away. But I would expect that we may see that just as a delayed removal. And interestingly, the Corruption plus Voidwalker is another way to deal with a big threat that we didn't mention earlier.
Yeah, sure.
That's a way to not only absorb a hit, but also ensure that a minion dies without getting any significant damage in. And yeah, now Pimping Ho's Voidwalker is kind of just going away.
Hey, it got 3 damage in, and sometimes it's good enough if you can extend your range. But Pimping Ho's not playing any kind of Leroy Jenkins Face Manipulator combo, so it's not going to be relevant. I do like holding onto the coin now that I had a second to think about it, because I think if your opponent who didn't play something proactive turn 4 most likely won't have the very most proactive play on turn 5, you can coin out the Emperor Thaurissan and take initiative from there.
Yeah, and that's definitely what Pimping Ho is going to do next turn, almost certainly. Soshi doesn't have a great power play this turn. His best proactive play is either Refreshment Vendor or Kazakus. You often will want to wait with Kazakus to potentially play it in combination with Bran. But this is actually an opportunity for him to play the Refreshment Vendor and not give his opponent much life value off of it while getting the full heal himself.
Yeah, and gotta save that Kazakus like you just mentioned for Bran, so it feels like that's off the table. Not to mention that if you play Bran, you play Kazakus, your hand's full too, so you're back in the same position as you were the previous.
He does have the 10 cards already anyway.
So Refreshment Vendor does seem to indicate, does seem to be the better line here. And Soshio's running out of time. He's a little indecisive here. Dropping the Ooze would be the same exact problem. He would have to drop the Ooze and the Sunfury Protector in order to turn on Life Tap again, because then he needs to be able to have 2 spaces in the hand for the following turn.
Pimping Ho picks up his Kazakus. Actually, Mountain Giant, not coining out the Emperor.
Interesting here.
Both of them essentially demand a removal effect.
Right. Well, the interesting thing about the Mountain Giant is, yes, it's a very powerful card, but you're coming up on a turn where your opponent can remove it twice over, through Siphon Soul or through Blast Crystal Potion. And then, what are you going to do with the 2 remaining mana?
It's not really clear what Pimping Ho's plan is here.
It will tap.
Okay.
And he's got to dump a card. He's going to dump the coin.
Coin Corruption. This is a little bit of an awkward spot because he could potentially just have, say, Shadow Bolt plus Mortal Coil to trade this in. Probably not going to use Soulfire. Well, he could Soulfire plus Shadow Bolt, or use the Blast Crystal. This is actually kind of an awkward spot for Soshi because he doesn't have any combination of cards except for the Blast Crystal Potion that allows him to cleanly remove this 8/8. And perhaps that was what Pimping Ho's plan was. Just thinking, okay, well, unless he has Siphon Soul, he's putting himself off mana by playing Blast Crystal Potion as the only good removal for this, whereas he theoretically could have just some amount of damage plus his minion on board to remove an Emperor. And this can actually allow Pimping Ho to play the Emperor on the next turn, still cleanly on mana, while getting a removal effect out of his opponent's hand as well.
Yeah, that actually stays in line with Pimping Ho's MO. It seems like the way he layers his threats is he really likes to try and get the removal spell out first, and then protect what he really wants to get more mileage out. He's really hoping that Emperor Thaurissan can live multiple turns. Now he picks up the Twilight Drake, and I wonder if he's leaning towards that now. It is vulnerable to any kind of silence effect, but I don't see that in the deck of Soshi, so I don't think that's something that he's accounting for at the moment.
And that's actually a pretty important element of these matchups. The players do have access to their opponent's deck list beforehand, but they need to remain aware of what cards are in their opponent's deck throughout the match.
Definitely.
So the knowledge that, for instance, there is no Spellbreaker in his opponent's deck is very important for how exactly he wants to map out his turns and play his threats.
Yeah, this is a really powerful discount. Things like Twisting Nether getting cheaper. Bran Kazakis now can squeeze in for 5 mana and potentially have you do other really powerful plays in all in one turn. Solcio not having his own Emperor Thorstand, stuck with a little bit of a clunky hand.
Yeah. And Pimping Ho, he's already forced out the Blast Crystal Potion. Now this is going to require some kind of off-curve, either the Siphon Soul, which would be on-curve, but some sort of off-curve combination of the Ooze plus, say, Shadow Bolt to remove it, and doesn't give Solcio the opportunity to do anything proactive himself. It also just really demands a removal effect. If this sticks in play, the advantage that Pimping Ho will gain over turns is absolutely enormous, just in terms of the tempo advantage.
Okay, well, Socio's assembled pieces of the combo that he needs to finish the game here. He's got Leroy Jenkins and Faceless Manipulator. I mean, Soulfire is not trivial either. And right now, I think Socio is just kind of plotting out this next couple of turns here. What am I going to be doing? The only thing that's even proactive is this second-rate Bruiser, and it's going to be off-curve for the following turn.
And Pimping Ho has a great play next turn if he wants to go for it. Just Ragnaros. His opponent has already used one of his hard removal effects with the Blast Crystal Potion. And again, if he does pick up a Siphon Soul, he is using his mana inefficiently to play it. It would only be 6 of his 7 total mana. And if he doesn't have a removal spell for it, well, if Ragnaros sits in play, that game's going to end pretty soon.
Yep, no Sylvanas from Solcio from a quick scan of his deck list. Could use Faceless Manipulator and try to retaliate with his own Ragnaros for cheaper. So it looks like this game's going to accelerate a lot faster here, and this is what tends to happen past the midway point here. We're going to find out who's going to decisively take the board.
I mean, I think the only replay here is Faceless. He has to Faceless this and have his Ragnaros hit his opponent's Ragnaros. That's the only reasonable removal effect he has available.
Is this so bad if he misses his opponent's Rag and hits his opponent in the face? Say if he doesn't die, does he have enough damage to follow
It's
up?
true. He could potentially just, well, he's actually out of range of being able to Leroy plus Faceless. It's still, that's 10 mana. He could have Leroy plus the Soulfire, but he would have to get another face hit with the Ragnaros. And
Right, well, Faceless Manipulator, maybe if the Faceless Manipulator hits face twice, that's 16 damage over 2 turns, and then he has Leroy Jenkins and Soulfire.
This is a big moment. Where's Ragnaros going to go? Takes out the other Ragnaros.
Wow.
So that's a huge swing in favor of Solcio here.
Yeah, it's a big moment for Solcio. Pimping Ho does have some answers to it, so it's not time to panic just yet.
Pimping Ho, he's still at a reasonable life total here, and he can kind of go wide in the board. He can even Bran Kazakis plus Twilight Drake to get double potions and an absolutely enormous Twilight Drake. And he knows his opponent's removal is expended.
Right.
He knows his opponent doesn't have Siphon Soul because he would have Siphon Soul.
Right.
He could have a Twisting Nether, but that gives up the possibility of keeping that Ragnaros in the board as well.
So Pimping Ho picked kind of quick, but it was a 5-mana potion. Now he's going for the 10 split. I like this a lot. I think too many people get greedy with 10-mana potions at first. And looks like a couple of removal options, but it looks like this one, the very end choice here is not that good. You don't really want King's Blood. You don't really want adding random demons unless you're running out of value.
This is about as big as a Twilight Drake's going to get. 417.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Most things don't really get even up to that much health in the entire game of Hearthstone. And now that you're able to have it stick around, it can absorb a rag shot and bump into it and still be alive.
Not bad. Not bad.
Pretty good effective tool for trading. Right. Not impervious, though, because there is a way for Solcio to remove. But the one thing that I love about going wide is if Solcio commits to a Twisting Nether, he's losing his own rag.
Yeah, that's pretty crucial interaction here. Pimping Ho knows that there's not that many things that Solcio can do to actually deal with this board. Twisting Nether is one of them, and that sacrifices a lot of the board position that he's built up at this point so far.
Do you like being pretty aggressive here with the Faceless Shambler, the second-rate Bruiser, and maybe even part ways with Soulfire to get rid of Bran so that your opponent can't just punish you with Defender of Argus? I mean, that's a pretty big board yourself. And your opponent has to deal with it with only Twisting Nether.
It's true. You can kind of put them in the same spot that you're in, which is, okay, use your Twisting Nether to deal with this board that I've set up when you already have a board yourself, which is never really what you do want to do. Ooh,
Wow.
No. He's like, okay, I'm not going to do that. Fine, I'll life tap, and that's
Sure.
perfect. Siphon Soul right off the top.
Although, if Ragnaros misses, this could get punished. Oh, but it hits a very crucial target in the Brand Bronzebeard. Solsi-Ho, he's riding his emotions on his sleeves right now. Just you can definitely see how anxious he is when some of these shots from Ragnaros go off.
Yeah, we see the Shadow Bolt, and then it's going to be a Polymorph Resummon Potion on the 5, so able to take out both minions, and oh, another Emperor Thaurissan is a huge revive from that spell. It's going to discount his hand again.
Yeah, and I mean,
He can even fit a life tap in here, too.
He can squeeze in life tap. He knows he's relatively safe from any kind of burst. His opponent already used a Faceless Manipulator. His opponent has also not used an Emperor Thaurissan themselves. And this just gets Ping Ho in a pretty decisive advantage. I love that he's pressuring here, put Solsi-Ho in a really defensive position, forcing him to kind of feel like he has to play Reno Jackson because he knows another Kazakus potion exists. So there is hypothetically a lot of burst damage that can come out from his hand.
He is at 13, so I don't know if Reno is nearly as potent here as just playing your Twisting Nether. Though it does mean you don't have access to a Twisting Nether anymore, which is also big in the matchup.
Right.
And you also have nothing you can follow Twisting Nether up with. You'll often want to Twisting Nether into a Doomsayer, for instance. But Solsi-Ho already used his Doomsayer many turns ago to set up the early turns of the game. And this means that now, if he does Twisting Nether, he's just passing the tempo of the game back over to Ping Ho, who has multiple Emperor ticks on his hand.
It looks like he's just going to have, he's going to use Kazakus.
Yeah, he's going to
hoping he gets
for
4 damage
AoE. Yeah, the 4 damage AoE would be the best option here, and he does not find it.
But perhaps he had the option for the 5 damage as a backup, so he still can at least take out Emperor Thaurissan.
That does still leave a pretty big board remaining for Ping Ho. There is 6 on the board and a very, very low life total, but he does pick the 7 armor. So that means, yes, he's going to be able to at least mitigate this next turn from Ping Ho, and he does preserve that Twisting Nether in his hand. So if Ping Ho has another, say, big revive potion, he's able to actually clear that board as well.
It does look like, just from glimmering, or just glancing at the very side of the second Kazakus potion, that he has an opportunity to nuke the board by transforming everything into sheep. The second part of the potion,
I believe it was deal 8 damage.
Was deal 8 damage. Okay, so having the ability to burst from the hand gives him 16 right now. Oh, sorry, 14 right now. Can't really squeeze in Hellfire or Defender of Argus to add the extra damage here. So Ping Ho's hand looks kind of okay, kind of weak. It's very reactive, to say the least. And that card kind of destroys his own board.
He does have the Defender of Argus, which could help build up this board a little bit more. Can dig a little bit with the Dark Peddler, try and find some more burst damage, perhaps a Soulfire or Power Overwhelming. Sure. There's Power Overwhelming.
That extends the burst range even more.
Yeah. If he does pick the Power Overwhelming and there's no Reno and the board survives, it's definitely lethal damage next turn. But Solsi-Ho, of course, knows that and has the option to clear the board or Reno. The problem for Solsi-Ho, though, if he just clears the board, he is also, he's actually not quite dead. That's a Power Overwhelming, not Soulfire. I was thinking he's got 4 damage. Like, wait, no, can't use it if there's no minions in play.
Yeah, that's a huge
But will be very nearly dead if he just Twisting Nethers. He could actually play the Dirty Rat that he just drew and then Twisting Nether to potentially pick up a key minion from his opponent's hand. Though Ping Ho, he's played Brand, he's played Kazakus, he's played a lot of the key minions in the matchup already.
But landing it on Reno Jackson, for example, or
Jaraxxus
could be massive. Now, we know that's not going to be the case. In fact, it's likely to pull a pretty weak minion, such as Sunfury Protector or your opponent's Dirty Rat, which is always humorous. I actually stand corrected, by the way. Beginning of the game, I said Solsi-Ho might have a Shadow Flame in his deck. He does not. So the Twisting Nether is his most powerful area of effect card. So if he parts way with this and his opponent plays a second Kazakus potion that summons 3 minions and builds health, he could be in big trouble. So you can definitely see why Solsi-Ho would rather not use this if he doesn't have to. And it looks like he's not. Reno Jackson seems to be the choice here. And that does keep him alive for now. Because he could supplant this, or he could support this with another taunt.
So actually just going to go ahead and drop the Mount. So wants to just get as efficient use of his mana as well as just a big threat into play. Though this from Ping Ho, there is 30 life on the other side, so we're not going to be really looking for burst potential. He still does have 8 on board and then 12 from hand. So he has 20 damage that he could do this turn. Not going to be going for that plan at this point, however.
Yeah, a mere 20 damage without even having to use Leroy Jenkins and Faceless Manipulator. Seems like Pimping Ho is definitely in the driver's seat here. He picks up the Siphon Soul off the top of the deck, allowing him to perhaps squeeze in Life Tap if he's going to consume all of his mana. And I think Pimping Ho is starting to catch on to Sosi-Ho's plan here. He took a long time to think, and then he just played Reno Jackson. It feels like if Reno Jackson was the best option, he probably would have opted for it. I have to think, if I'm Pimping Ho's seat, that Sosi-Ho might have Twisting Nether in his hand. That should account for what he wants to do.
It's definitely something that's got to be on Pimping Ho's mind at this point, because he also knows this is the best removal that he has left in his deck available to him.
Oh, awkward.
Wow, Pimping Ho with
man.
a clear, just brain misstep there. Taps with a full hand and burns a card.
Ooh, we've all been there.
Oh yeah,
just not in front of thousands of people watching.
Not necessarily.
Yikes.
And this is the start of the day. Pimping Ho said that he slips up later.
Oh man.
Match number 1. You can't be doing that.
His stamina lasts only 1.5 games. Oh wow. Well, I mean, hopefully that wasn't that big of a deal. Imp Gang Boss, pretty low impact, but that could have been a big deal. And I mean, that gives Sosi-Ho some recognition of what's going on through Pimping Ho's mind right now, which is he's not clearly thinking about every single detail. He's right now tunnel visioning a lot. Maybe that gives him a little bit of insight also on what Pimping Ho's hand is.
It could be giving him some amount of a read that there's perhaps not the Kazakus potion he thinks might be there. Perhaps this is not a build-a-board potion. Perhaps he's just looking to get aggressive here, and Sosi-Ho needs to be aware of that and defend himself accordingly.
So I saw an opportunity for Sosi-Ho to board clear with Demon Wrath and the Mortal Coil, but that would mean that Reno Jackson dies himself. And I think Sosi-Ho rather just put a really meaty board and try to dominate the position from here. It is a little bit subtle, but he does have an opportunity to win the game if his opponent can't deal with this board, because he has Leroy Jenkins and Soulfire to add some damage. So if Pimping Ho is a little bit too lax, then perhaps Sosi-Ho can find a way to win the game.
There is the Abyssal Enforcer that Pimping Ho has access to, that along with his minions on board can clear everything off. And that Reno Jackson draw is actually pretty crucial. So life tapping last turn got him closer to Reno Jackson.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the mark of a good defensive Warlock player in general is how often they life tap. Just when you life tap too much, I'm imagining that macro image where someone's whacking the button a little bit too much. You life tap too much. You gotta have some self-control here, Pimping Ho. It's the best hero power in the game in the vacuum, and sometimes you get a little carried away with it. That's all.
Absolutely. He does tap here. He does know that the Faceless is gone, so there's no threat of the Leroy Burst combo. There's also has been no Emperor played from his opponent.
Right.
So the max damage that Sosi-Ho could do from this position would be just 14, but there is a taunt in the way now. He recognizes that, okay, if he does have Leroy plus PO plus Soulfire, if I'm at 14, I'm dead. So he taunts up the Abyssal Enforcer.
Definitely. And one thing, too, is that Pimping Ho had 9 cards, so this opens up life tap again.
It's true.
So he can life tap in Reno Jackson, get closer to something like Jaraxxus or some other big bomb that maybe we're not considering. Sosi-Ho picks up Ragnaros. Maybe this is an opportunity for him to find a way to set up Ragnaros in the best position to try and posture himself to win the game. The big problem is cards like Sunfury Protector. If it was just Abyssal Enforcer, it'd be a different story.
This Dirty Rat. Oh, into the Doomsayer. Oh, so now
is that good or bad?
It's awkward. It's certainly awkward because it means that he can't follow it up. But he was planning on just Twisting Nethering this turn anyway. Right. So it means he gets to preserve his Twisting Nether. Oh, but it's going to walk right into a top deck Jaraxxus for Pimping Ho.
Yeah.
And there's no threat of 15 burst, as we mentioned, from Sosi-Ho anymore. He could do 14 in a single turn.
Right.
With the Leroy plus Power Overwhelming plus Soulfire. And the Jaraxxus on an empty board has to be tempting for Pimping Ho.
Yeah, that's sort of what you want. You want Doomsayer to lead you into a Jaraxxus. That's been a lesson and a theme across a lot of our Reno Warlock mirrors, and he's choosing not to. Instead, choosing to get value off Reno Jackson immediately, and perhaps he sees an opportunity to kill his opponent because he has Power Overwhelming and he has the Kazakus potion. So he says, rather than try to fight a long game potential. I want to end it in 2 turns. I know former world champion Firebet might approve of this play because he feels like setting up 2-turn lethal a lot of times is correct.
Well, I'm pretty sure you set up 2-turn lethal with Jiraxis anyway. You just punch them with your fists, put them to 12, and then you just have fist plus the Kazakus potion that can kill them as well.
That is true.
Actually, you're 1 short that way.
Is that true?
You're actually 1 short.
Oh, because you'd be at, you put him at 9.
Right.
And you don't have the ability to do it. So, he could squeeze in another one mana minion play with Dirty Rat, but that'd be too risky.
Yeah.
So this does set up Ping Ping Ho with the best opportunity to try to lethal, and it's a little subtle. Yeah. It's very subtle. Neo Jackson is a defensive play. It's not really an offensive set to try to win the game. He's trying to sneak one over Socio, who snuck one over him the previous game.
And yeah, Socio here doesn't have great defensive options. Going to just go with the Emperor plus the Imp Gang boss. And that's going to get it.
That's it. Ping Ping Ho did the exact same to Socio. Says, you got one by me, and now I got one by you. Power Overwhelming plus the Kazakus potion will end the game. And the series is tied 1-1. Socio, he's pretty mad because he knows that this was an opportunity for him to win because he looked like he outlasted everything.
In both of these games, a player played Emperor Tharson, then they just die.
Yeah.
So, one good burst deserves another, and it will be 1-1 in this series with Ping Ping Ho tying up the score.
Yeah, that was very good recognition from Ping Ping Ho. It looks like at one point it was a little bit unstable play because he was just not really counting everything, but he was able to spot an opportunity to really trick his opponent and set himself up for a 2-turn lethal, and that made the difference because his deck from that point on, unless he got Jiraxis out a lot earlier, he was going to lose. There's a lot more value on the side of Solcios.
Yeah, Socio just having access to the Leroy Burst combo. Even if he didn't have the full combo, it does make it very dangerous for Ping Ping Ho to Jiraxis. When I was looking at it, I was like, oh, he can just kill him over 2 turns. Jiraxis is great here. It looked fantastic. But when I realized it was, oh, he's 1 damage off, he probably realized that too and just went with the Reno.
There you go, Ping Ping Ho showing why he's a player to be feared and not to be slept on, even though there's a couple of trips on the way. Take a look at this profile to get to know Ping Ping Ho a little bit better in case you haven't met him yet.
Ping Ping Ho looks pretty tough.
Don't let your dreams be dreams.
Well met.
I'm Ping Ping Ho. I'm 29 years old and I'm from Taiwan. I've been playing Hearthstone for over 3 years, but I'm not playing Hearthstone. I'm probably thinking about Hearthstone. My favorite sport is table tennis because I love to play it. I guess I should exercise regularly.
All right, well, Ping Ping Ho is pretty much eating, breathing Hearthstone at this point.
I was expecting him to say my favorite sport is Hearthstone, not table tennis. But
yeah, it was definitely a nice punchline there, whether intentional or not. That's kind of the genius of Ping Ping Ho. I think he knows that we enjoy having him around, but at the same time, it's not like he's trying to do it. It's just he's himself, which is very refreshing because some people always do say that it's a little bit harder to connect to some of the Asian Pacific players, but Ping Ping Ho makes a really big effort. He studied, or he had an opportunity to live in the USA, learn English, and he does primarily do all of his interviews in English, which is very much appreciated.
Yeah, I love that he's such a character. We saw his reaction, very genuine when he life tapped there and overdrew, sort of throwing his hands up in disgust. And a lot of players just kind of steely-eyed on camera. You can't really get any kind of emotions out of them. But actually, both these players, we saw Solciho, as you mentioned, sort of wearing his emotions on his sleeve as things were not going his way.
It's true.
But now it will be the Tempo Mage from Ping Ping Ho against the Pirate Warrior from Solcio. This is a matchup that we haven't seen a ton, as Tempo Mage only fairly recently kind of rose to prominence in the tournament scene thanks to its performance in the hands of Green Sheep 2 weeks ago.
That's correct. Tempo Mage also went through a bit of a renaissance the last week, but has since dropped a little bit in the confidence of players. If you just look at how many brought Tempo Mage this week, 29% of the field, or around 30%, last week brought it. Less than 10% brought it this week. So you can see a lot of people change their opinions. 1 in 5 players decided, like, nah, nope, screw it. I'm not going to bring Tempo Mage. And maybe that ends up being in Ping Ping Ho's favor because people saw Tempo Mage fail a lot. That makes them put it off their radar, and perhaps that can surprise their opponents because they're not accounting for it.
Well, this is not a matchup where you really are going to be making too many changes to your deck in anticipation of Tempo Mage. The Pirate Warrior deck, pretty tried and true at this point in the metagame. And it will be N'Zoth's first mate, and everyone's favorite pirate Patches coming down on turn 1, sparing no time to get the beatdowns on.
My favorite pirate is Sky Captain Crag, because that guy is legit. You ever hear his battle cry entrance?
He has charge.
Yeah, everything has charge apparently if you're a pirate. This seems to be handing it out, though. But yeah,
Its actual rules text is charge.
oh yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's what you're referencing. Very nice play here from Ping Ho, being able to tie in the Sorcerer's Apprentice and complicating the trading situation, but that's not really the case for Socio. He does have an opportunity over a couple turns here to really remove it efficiently and gain some significant board advantage.
Yeah, this is a powerful card, the Mirror Images, against warrior decks. It's less powerful against warrior decks that just have cheap minions. It's great if it's absorbing hits from, say, Fiery War Axe or even better, Arcanite Reaper, but it's much less powerful if your opponent is playing, say, the South Sea Deckhand that we see in Celsio's hand here. That can easily take out one of these images and leave a threat on board.
Yeah, and at the same time, when do you weave in cards like Frothing Berserker as well? This is all going through Socio's mind. What looks clean is an upgrade and to start whacking away, or perhaps using Fiery War Axe now and saving the upgrade for later.
Yeah, he's actually going to just go have the Frothing Berserker here. He wants to get the growth on that going as soon as possible. He recognizes that he still has access to the possibility to, say, upgrade plus Dread Corsair next turn, or just use a Deckhand next turn, but can't keep these pumps on the Frothing Berserker if he waits on them. Pimping Ho does have removal that can kill it with a pair of Arcane Blast, but that's a very high price to pay to kill a single minion.
I mean, unless Arcane Intellect picks up Mana Worm, which is a possibility, he has two of them in his deck, and
Pimping Ho also has the possibility of just trading with his Sorcerer's Apprentice, but if he doesn't keep a minion on board, it's going to be very difficult for him to really deal with the clock that the Pirate Warrior is putting on him.
well, at the same time, if you the one damage is still hard for Warrior to generate past this taunt, and
True.
perhaps Pimping Ho feels confident. And I think, you know, if you're the Tempo Mage and you have cards like Barnes and Ragnaros, you're feeling that late game you can outmuscle your opponent. So all you need to do is survive the early game, turn off any pirate synergy your opponent might have coming up on turn 3, which is the Bloodsail Cultist, and that's something that you're really afraid of.
Well, this could actually be a really big turn for Solcio. He can play the he could play War Axe plus upgrade and the Corsair. He could play the Deckhand to clear the board. The Deckhand does run right into a potential hero power for your opponent, but that does inefficiently use their mana next turn.
Right.
And in addition to the value of cards, that's something you need to be paying attention to. You don't want to ensure that your opponent isn't getting great uses of their resources on their turn as well.
Yeah, this allows Socio to play everything next turn from his hand. And Peeping Ho, you know, he picks up the Thalnos, which allows him to open up a hero power turn before you would just look at the Barnes and think, oh man, I really don't necessarily want to have to play and open up the Pirates. So Peeping Ho is going to shut it off, and Socio is going to upgrade anyways. It doesn't even matter.
I mean, this is just still a huge turn. Upgrade into Corsair, into Captain if he wants it. He does pick up a Reaper. I think it was making him rethink whether he wants to use the upgrade right now. He saw like a mouse over on the upgrade pretty much immediately, but then, okay, do I want to hold off on this? Because he can still just play Captain plus Corsair and forgo the upgrade, then potentially play the Reaper down the road and get the upgrade in there.
Right, if you upgrade from Fire War Axe +1, it goes from 6 to 12 damage. Arcanite Reaper goes from 10 to 18. So it's a huge difference.
Big jump.
To be able to get 18 damage onto your opponent. And maybe it's worth keeping. Peeping Ho, also, you know, a little bit awkward that when you play Barnes, you're really hoping to pull something like Ragnaros from your deck, or something just as impactful. That might be the most powerful minion that you would have. So I don't really see too many good Barnes targets outside of Flamewaker here.
Flamewaker wouldn't even be that impressive at this stage because at best he can cast a mirror image this turn, and that mirror image couldn't even protect his Flamewaker because there are 3 sources of damage on the side of the opponent.
Right. So perhaps Pimping Ho is encouraged instead to take it even slower. Forgotten Torch comes into hand pretty conveniently, allowing him to remove some of the pirates. And maybe he can try to play the resource battle because Socio's down to 2 cards, and you have Ragnaros in the late game to help climb back and race your opponent if needed. Because you're right, Barnes into Flamemaker wouldn't even be that good.
Yeah, he is just going to go ahead and Forgotten Torch down the pirate, ping the other pirate. This is putting Socio in a spot where he still has 6 damage on the board. He can just throw these in and then just, if he wants, get the Arcanite Reaper down to start upgrading. The N'Zoth First Mate is a little bit awkward. Everything's kind of falling in weird spots mana-wise for Socio. He could just play the N'Zoth's First Mate and Hero Power this turn. That leaves the Arcanite Reaper plus upgrade available on mana next turn to get maximum value out of that, as well as get the pirate in play. but that is a 1/1 pirate that can just die to a hero power as well. So lots of decisions for Silcio here as to how exactly he wants to manage these resources.
Well, it's not like Peeping Hoe has any weapon removal, so setting up the Arcanite Reaper this turn does allow him to open up his mana in case he draws into a big charger or big minion in general. And I use big as a relative term. If you pick the Frothing Berserker number 2, picked up Kor'kron Elite, that does allow him to get that out too while upgrading for extra damage.
He is just going to go ahead and get the Thus first main play. This does give him a hero power, which is not irrelevant in the matchup, but it does mostly come down to whether the Tempo Mage can remove your minions, not whether they actually burn you out. It's generally the player who is able to stick the biggest threat. It is Barnes. Yeah, not particularly exciting in this spot with the Azure Drake here, as it does not really buff any spells in his hand. It can die very easily.
All right, well, Soshi-Ho, if he's able to pair all the damage just in his hand alone over 3 turns, that's 22 damage. So, you know, if he's able to get that in, but Peeping Hoe with the second mirror images is going to be a huge roadblock.
Yeah, this is actually kind of an awkward spot for Silcio here. Because he played the 1/1 last turn, he didn't equip the Reaper. That means there's now a Mortal Strike he's drawn, which he cannot play alongside Reaper, which means he can't kill Barnes without wasting a full Reaper swing. So that can allow Peeping Hoe to actually keep minions on the board.
Well, he could Mortal Strike instead, but
right. But then he couldn't deploy the Arcanite Reaper,
right,
which is pretty huge as well. And it does leave him with the 3/2 that can just get pinged down along with the Azure Drake next turn. Though he could just attack into the Azure Drake.
Yeah,
and not play the Reaper.
Up damage with the Dread Corsair, so to speak. If your opponent, if you can get damage twice over, then it's worth a Mortal Strike.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the play that sort of thinking about it that I actually like. It would be to Mortal Strike the Barnes, but he is not wasting any time doing any kind of minion removal here with the weapons.
Yeah.
Face.
He's made his intentions very clear.
And yeah, this does represent 2 more turns of that Arcanite Reaper and a Mortal Strike waiting in the hand. Frostbolt's a nice draw, though.
Yeah, that's a
and
very
the
nice
mirror image is huge because, as you mentioned, that's a very powerful card. Ooh, Flamewaker plus mirror images here. If a single hit from the Flamewaker hits on the Dread Corsair, he can kill it with just the Azure Drake.
Yeah.
Yep. So just the Azure Drake's going to kill this, and now those 0/2s are a huge roadblock for Silcio at this point. They're each potentially absorbing 6 points of damage from that Arcanite Reaper.
Wow, 1 mana can gain 12 life, maybe even more. I mean, if Soshi-Ho picks up ways to upgrade, he's just going to have to continue to manually get through this. This is why people talk about Feral Spirits, they talk about mirror images, or even just the Taunt Totem from Shaman. It could be such a big roadblock despite how small it is. Peeping Hoe prioritizing the spell damage.
And even once those are gone, there's a Frostbolt in the hand.
You're right.
He can just send that to the face, not only get damage in, but shut down the weapon as well. Leroy Jenkins, the draw for Silcio here. That is not going to be a great removal effect here, giving his opponent 2 more guys. He may just be sending the weapon into one of those mirror image tokens.
Yeah, I would love to have another little pirate just to get past his mirror images, but just can't really seem to find it right now. And Leroy Jenkins' Mortal Strike can't even necessarily guarantee the maximum damage right now.
I wonder, I think that from Silcio's perspective, it might be his best play to just Mortal Strike face this turn. That would put, and attack one of the mirror images. That would put your opponent in range if you drew Southsea Deckhand to Southsea Deckhand plus Leroy and actually have lethal damage next turn if your opponent doesn't freeze your face.
That is the only Mortal Strike in the hand, or in the deck of Soshi-Ho. Wow, going for Leroy this turn.
All right, well, this...
this opens up for him Kor'kron.
This does mean that he can draw something. Yeah, next turn can draw a Kor'kron, which would potentially represent lethal, along with the Mortal Strike if he is not frozen. Oh, is this just gonna? I don't even know if this is lethal damage. This is just a lot.
Yeah, he doesn't have enough to play all the spells. Doesn't have enough mana. Excuse me.
Oh yeah, he has 1 mana short to play all of them.
But if he did, that is 7, 14, 18 damage just from burn alone, plus the actual damage from the Flamewaker, plus the board. So that would have most likely led to some kind of kill. But it doesn't look like that's the case for Peeping Hoe. But I do like the idea of Frostbolting now this turn.
Oh, you absolutely Frostbolt the face now. It locks out the Arcanite Reaper. The only way your opponent is winning is racing. You have so many more resources than them. You have the Frostbolt with spell damage, and then the Flamewaker trigger as well. Everything going face right now.
Yeah, not the
Fireball.
biggest of deals.
And it's crucial, well, not actually super crucial, that there's only one Mortal Strike in the deck because Pimping Ho's at 13. He's even out of range of double Mortal Strike if those did exist.
Yeah.
And yeah, all this can just go face, and it is very, very close to lethal. Nothing Solcio can draw that's going to finish the game off, and Pimping Ho has an overwhelming board presence plus burn in hand.
Yeah, Finley is a great card, but just too late and not able to do much here. Solcio, most likely just going to think about all of his options that he can get off Sir Finley, but even if he just Mortal Strikes defensively, if your opponent's just going to wear you down and you're losing all your damage to win the game. If you have to use Mortal Strike to eliminate Flamewaker, for example, and then you play Sir Finley for defensive hero power or some way to protect yourself, how do you actually win? You still have only 6 damage out of 13.
There's no combination that he can survive the turn, so chooses to just concede. Doesn't even play Sir Finley for the cool entrance sound. Who's up for an adventure?
Yeah, Sir Finley is one of my favorite cards, and
great.
we only get a couple more months before rotation. I want to see a little bit more of his animations and some of his impact here.
I actually particularly like Sir Finley, because I've actually been playing a reasonable amount of Shaman lately. Sorry. But I always play Morgul.
Don't apologize.
I always play
for ever being
Morgul
here.
when I play Shaman, and Sir Finley says, hey, old friend, how about a cup of tea after the match? So I always greet back.
Oh.
I specifically greet Sir Finley when my opponent plays him. As we heard in the squelch conversation, I do love to use those emotes.
Your opponent doesn't know that, though. For all intents and purposes, he probably thinks that you're trying to intimidate him.
He can hear the Sir Finley entrance emote too.
True. Assuming he plays with sound on, which is certainly going to be interesting to see if we end up seeing more of Sir Finley's being able to be impactful. Looking like he's already making a splash in Pushman versus Tom 60229, a match that we're following really closely. Chonger versus Volcano as well. Chonger, one of the picks. I want to say Raven made the Chonger pick. So we'll see if he's ended up making a splash here. Raven did manage to predict that Frozen last week would go to the top 4. TJ and Annabelle are following the scene pretty closely, and we'll be jumping to those games shortly after this in round number 1. Coming up on Pimping Ho versus Solcio Hill. Pimping Ho with a 2-1 lead, and I gotta say, despite that little small misstep of the life tap here, he's been looking pretty sharp.
Yeah, he's definitely taken some interesting lines in some of these games that worked out quite well for him in a number of cases. The game 1 where he ended up dying to the burst damage, where I felt like he was firmly ahead, I didn't necessarily like the decisions that he made there, but overall he has definitely been putting together a solid performance here, and now only needs to win a single game with this Pirate Warrior.
Ryan, he had to have exactly those 3 cards in a Reno deck.
He did.
So you have to think, oh, well, does he have the actual combos, but he doesn't have duplicates in the deck? Seems unlikely.
And now Solcio with kind of an awkward draw here, frankly, leaving just a South Sea deckhand on turn 1, no weapon to be seen, while Pimping Ho has a great array of options here. He's going to be able to go Buccaneer into Coin First Mate and remove the entire board from the opponent.
Nasty. And Solcio looking a little desperate right now.
He's not happy as all of his minions die, and he can at best follow up with a Blood Cell Raider this turn.
Which gets eaten up by the Fiery War Axe. And, by the way, allows Pimping Ho to tempo out 2 Dread Corsairs the following turn.
Did Pimping Ho just wave by at the camera? It kind of looked like that, because, I mean, that's actually what's happening. This is basically like, goodbye, this game is over, as Fiery War Axe this turn, plus a pair of Corsairs on future turns, and a Frothing Berserker. He has basically everything you could want. And Solcio is left trying to play defense, which is not something this deck does well.
No, any minion he plays gets eaten up by a Fiery War Axe plus the Nizal's First Mate, and Socio's chances.
There's a War Axe.
Okay.
So that is a little bit late, but can allow him to play some of that defense we're just talking about. Kills the small-time Buccaneer, but Pimping Ho does have a really strong follow-up with double Dread Corsair. Or a Frothing. I think he's going to play the Dread Corsairs. Frothing in this spot is a little bit greedy, because if your opponent just has a Crocron Elite, they can eat your Frothing if you don't play it and get it buffed the same turn.
Right, and then you have to, and then they hit your 1/1 and they have to use your weapon, so you lose that a lot. I agree a lot. Many fronts here. Not to mention that it's technically more power on the board right now, so you're rushing your opponent even better. Solcio picks up Sir Finley, which does fit in with the mana curve, allowing him to play the Frothing Berserker to challenge the board a little bit better. Just try to see if you can dissect the tension. There's just too much pressure coming at you right now.
What now?
Yeah, definitely still a very tough spot for Celcio here. Really needs to try and find something that can help him claw back from behind. Just going to go ahead and play full removal. Mortal Strike and swing into these. Wow. Just try and stem the bleeding as much as he can. And it will at least slow things down, but Pimping Ho has more where that came from with the Frothing Berserker. And even if Celcio does find a Kor'kron, which would be his best draw at this stage, it's not able to really dominate the board because that N'Zoth's first mate is still there.
Yeah, and getting that 1 damage is pretty nice. It's not a trivial amount at all. Celcio picks up Bloodsail Cultist, too awkward once again, and the value of having the ability to play 2 minions this turn is massive, so maybe he turns to Sir Finley Murgleton instead for help.
Thinking back in this game, just to turn 1, where Celcio just played the South Sea deckhand, got his patches out and just attacked to the face, then Pimping Ho was able to remove his entire board. One thing that actually Firebat talked about recently on his stream is just how important in these matches it is to get value out of patches. And in this instance, Celcio basically gave up value of not only patches, but his South Sea deckhand to Pimping Ho's just turn 1. And I wonder if maybe he'd waited a little bit, but picked up that Fiery War Axe, if he could have gotten better sort of removal options throughout the course of the game.
Yeah, that's something to consider for sure, considering that Celcio's tempo is very poor right now. The Frothing Berserker gets removed on board.
And now there's a second Frothing for Pimping Ho. Picks up a Warlock War Leader.
Yeah.
And not a standout in this spot, but...
Might as well be Iron for Grizzly.
Not even, doesn't have taunt.
Well, I mean, it has implied taunt because of how it can function, but you're right, you're right. Wow.
But now these Frothing Berserkers are getting angry.
Yikes. That is a huge board, and when you push 5 to the face here, it's going to be pretty devastating. Pimping Ho, wondering if he should trade at all?
I think he may be wondering if he wants to armor up too, just because Heishi doesn't have Mortal Strike in his deck, so armoring up is not really a consideration. But for those decks that do, upgrade, he's 1 mana short of being able to actually upgrade and then upgrade his hook. No, it's not a hook from this. Hook's from, which one is this? Heavy Axe.
This is the Heavy Axe.
And yeah, Celcio.
That's a heavy loss. Celcio is down for the count. Pimping Ho takes the first series 3-1 as a number 15 seed. Keep in mind that round number 1 is paired based off their points seeding, so we do have number 1 playing the bottom, which I believe is 69.
It's actually Handsome Guy getting a bye.
Handsome Guy. You're right. Because we had an odd amount of numbers, one player was given a bye. It was Handsome Guy, which we'll see later in round number 2 and the forthcoming matches. Let's go ahead and check in with TJ and Admirable and see how the other matches are shaping up.